Welcome back to Inside Club, and today we're talking about assumptions on belonging. Stay tuned.
The first rule of Insight Club is you don't talk about Insight Club. You do Insight Club. The second rule of Insight Club is the only assumptions we make about one another are that we all want happiness and we all want to avoid suffering. The third rule of Insight Club is you check all your other assumptions at the door. We hope these conversations will bring you insights that incite you to action. Welcome to Insight Club. So I'll tell you where my mind is.
Yes.
Well, again, I mean, it's sparked by our intro and our assumption that we all want to avoid suffering. And you and I were chatting offline, like, unless we have a choice between suffering and not belonging. And in that case, I think we will happily choose suffering if we feel like it helps us belong.
Yeah.
And then the really wacky part of being human is that we may not need to suffer in order to belong, but that might feel like what we do. So I had an experience recently where I was watching myself. It was almost like being in slow motion, and I was watching myself recreate a pattern with somebody that I've done like my whole life. And as I was doing it, I was like, no, I don't want this. Like the Austin Powers, the steamrollers coming toward him in slow motion. It's like, there's plenty of time to get out of the way, but you just don't. You're like, no, not this. And I was watching the pattern play out. And at the time, it felt like I had no choice. Like, this is the dynamic. This is how I always am with this person. If I want to be in relationship with this person, which I do, like, this is just how we interact with one another. And I ended up feeling like so frustrated with myself. And it was like as part of my birthday celebration. And so I was especially frustrated because I was like, I'm 45 years old and I still can't, stop behaving in this way. Like, I'm still stuck in this pattern. I think when we have birthdays, we're especially cognizant of where we have and haven't grown. And then after the experience, I talked with somebody who knows us both and was like, I just did the same thing and they did the same thing. And she said, I've noticed when I do something different, they actually respond in a really positive way. And I thought about that and I thought, okay, my part is assuming that this has to be the dynamic. And it wasn't consciously going like, oh, I won't belong, I'll be rejected, but that's where it was coming from. That's what was driving it, right? So I was assuming that in order to belong, we had to have the same dynamic. And then, I had this beautiful insight from somebody who has the perspective to be able to see in the distance to go like, I bet if you change this, then they would respond and change. And then I thought like, oh my gosh, they probably are miserable in this dynamic too. And yet we keep repeating it. And so I could help us both. I could be the one to just shift something and then it would create this positive impact and we'd both be happy. And I can feel the truth of it. Sometimes people give us a possibility and even though we haven't tried it yet, we're like, yes, I know for sure that would work. And now I'm excited. I want to try it. But it was just such a cool, and that is like a good learning. I'm like, oh, I am getting wiser as I'm getting older. But I create the dynamic just as much as anybody else I'm in relationship with. And I have the choice to change it. And I can actually create more belonging. Like, I don't need to suffer in order to belong. And that was a great way to feel.
That's we started already with such a big realization, right? Because it is all about assumptions, as we talk about in this podcast all the time. We assume that we have to play a role in relationships, and it's hard to change sometimes, when especially when it's something that it's already so structured in that way, that feels like there's no other way. And even like, uh, you brought a great situation where, um, the other person that mentioned this to you changed her behavior,
Yeah.
and she was met with a different reaction that was way better.
Yeah.
The opposite happens sometimes as well, when we decide, okay, I'm gonna change my behavior, I'm gonna change the pattern, and we're met with something like, you changed, or what happened, why are you doing this, or even something different that happened to me already as well, that I change the way I act, the way I react, or I should say I respond instead of reacting. And I'm still met with, oh, you're being uh like that with kind of like a defensive energy, like, uh as if I had attacked,
Yeah.
but I, because the other person still expecting that I would be in defensive mode and I would be reactive and attacking. But even if I say something calmly, I'm still met with a defense uh, answer. And what something that happened to me already with that was that then I try to, sometimes I just leave it, but I try to explain that I I'm actually not complaining. I'm actually not um, angry. I'm not blaming you in any way. I'm just stay trying to help in the situation, right? And it changed a little bit, but still, I feel like sometimes the dynamics are so expected to be in that way that if you change, the person still senses that the old version is still there, and
Yeah.
maybe because the old version is still in our subconscious still.
But it's like you're in a play and you've done the play 100 times, 1,000 times, but you say a different line of dialogue and the other person still does the lines. They like, even though it
Ah,
doesn't make sense anymore,
exactly
right?
that.
Yeah.
Exactly that.
Like you say, "Let's go outside," and they say, "I don't want to go out to dinner." Right? And you're like, "Oh, I did."
I
But
haven't said.
yeah, yeah. That's you wow, that I thank you for sharing that because that for me highlights that we really it would serve us to dive into this idea of belonging because what do we even mean by that? You know, I was saying we'll choose suffering in order to belong, but are we belonging if we are maintaining a dynamic with somebody else that stunts our both people's growth, that makes us feel miserable, that just kind of rehashes the same emotions without there being any evolution? Like, would we really call that belonging? And if
Yeah.
not, what do we call it? Because it's like, yeah, I would do anything to make sure I'm not doing something new for
Mm.
fear of no longer being in relationship with this person. But is it belonging if I'm not able to express my most evolved truth in that moment? Like, if I'm not able to be the person I've grown into, and in order to maintain the relationship, and I don't mean even in a big way, maintain the relationship like, oh, we are going to speak to each other or we're not going to speak to each other. I just mean like the dynamic.
Yeah.
If what's required in order to be in that dynamic is I have to revert to a version of myself. Like imagine you're creating a song and something happens and it doesn't save and you have to revert to like 5 versions of the song. You're like, "No, it's evolved so much since then. Like I don't want to revert." It feels painful. Like that happens to me with writing sometimes. And I want to revert to that, that older version. Is that belonging if somebody's not even necessarily conscious, but somebody's energetic requirement of us is that we can revert to an older version of ourselves.
Ah, that actually brings me back to what you said about the play and having done this so many times that you just repeat the line even if the other line changed. It's automatic behavior.
Yeah.
So actually to be in new dynamics in relationships, what I feel we should do and we need to do is to be actually present. Because if we are in the automatic behavior, we are going to repeat the same lines, even if it's a new speech, even if it's a new situation. And maybe because we're so especially with the people that we are so used to, because we belong, because it's part of a system, and we tend to take for granted sometimes the relationship. At the same time, we don't want to not belong. We don't want to be left out. We might take for granted what we have and not be fully present in there.
Yeah. One of my big realizations with this scenario I'm describing is that I was not in any way giving credit to this other person for growing. And in fact, I was having a whole story about like, you don't change. You don't change. I'm doing all of this work to change it. You don't change. And then afterwards, I went, oh my God, I have evidence of this person changing. And I have not given them credit. And now I feel like what a lost opportunity and how um what an unfortunate way to relate to somebody where I'm insisting, see, here we are in the same dynamic again. You never change, you never think about it, when in fact I'm steering. And they're probably having the same feeling about me, like Megan would never change about this.
Mhm.
But there's this idea I really love in a book by Benjamin and Rosamund Zander called The Art of Possibility. And Benjamin Zander is a youth orchestra conductor, and he teaches, so he conducts orchestras and he's teaching the young musicians as well. And he has this practice he calls giving someone the A, and he trains the students to do this for themselves. Like you give yourself the A, and it means you assume that person really is trying their best. So like if he's in a situation and the orchestra is playing and that one violinist is just like they keep messing up in that one way, and he has a choice and he can be at the podium and go like, wow, that kid hasn't practiced and they don't care, and he can give them the F, right? He can be like, or he can give them the A and approach them after and go, what do you think would help you with that passage? Like, oh, do you want to go over it and talk about the rhythm? Like, where do you think we can get you some support so you can do this, right? And it's something that sounds great, when you hear about it, but it's actually very hard to do. But that came to mind when I thought about this situation is giving somebody the A is, oh, what happened in this dynamic, because I assume you want to have a great outcome and I want to have a great outcome. So like, where did we just miscommunicate or not get on the same page about something? Or, what's the practical thing? As opposed to here you are again trying to, control me or thwart me or something like this. And it, yeah, I was just put in mind how I I forget. I fall off of that behavior of assuming. I mean, we talk about not making assumptions, but I think there's something really powerful in assuming that other people want to avoid suffering and want to be happy and want to connect and um want to feel like they belong and want us to feel like we belong. What if we made that assumption coming in?
Mm, yeah. That would be a way better assumption than, yeah, just thinking that people always do this or they always do that.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess, like, do we even have a responsibility when we're in the play and we're saying different lines and they're still in the same old script? Do we have a responsibility to engage? Or is that a time to practice, like, okay, catch you later,
Good to me.
right?
Yeah. Choosing to not engage in those situations is also a change in behavior.
Yeah. I guess, like, how does that connect back to a feeling of belonging? Because that can be painful if somebody creates that neutral, loving boundary that's like, oh, no, thanks. I'm gonna not be part of this. I've been on the other end of that, of somebody setting that firm, loving, neutral boundary of like, no thanks, don't choose to engage in this dynamic. And then I feel very hurt and I feel rejected and I feel like I don't belong. But again, it's not really that my genuine self doesn't belong. It's that somebody is speaking to the behavior
Mm.
as opposed to me. They're saying, I don't want this dynamic as opposed to I don't want you. Um, God, that would be an amazing thing to be aware of in the moment. They're not rejecting me, they're rejecting this dynamic between us.
Wow. That's a big insight. If we could focus on the behavior and not in the, as this is the personality of the person.
Yeah. What do you think it means to feel like what is belonging in essence?
Mm.
Because we're so scared of not belonging.
Mm. Well, it's being part of something. And if we go back into uh, tribal mode, belonging meant that you were safe, meant that we had people that had our back, that we would survive. So if we don't belong, it means we're in danger. It means like you might die. You might be left, yeah, just without any protection, any support, anything. Like you don't matter to anyone. So if something uh, bad comes, no one will be there for you,
Yeah.
and that's scary on its own.
Okay, I think this is my big insight for this conversation because that's a root chakra belonging.
Yeah.
And I want to belong at a heart and throat chakra. And no wonder we would choose suffering or not being expressed or reverting back to the version, 5 iterations of us ago. Or even for me, it's like that I feel my child self come up. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh God, this is so 3-year-old me, right? Um, no wonder we would choose that over not belonging in a root chakra sense because it's survival.
Yes.
Except that the scenarios we're in where we're worried about belonging almost never are about actual biological survival. So, with that lens
Well,
now, yeah,
not in a conscious way,
yeah,
but in a subconscious way, in our instinctual side, it is sometimes. Because of course if we and this is where the liminal space is, that in between space is so hard when we're changing something, because we might fear not belonging in a system that is bringing suffering, but is what we know, and it's safe because it's known, even though it's not, uh I'm not playing a part that I want to play exactly in here, to go into a more like heart chakra, the sense of belonging, where I feel like I can express myself and I can be myself and I fit in this system. My whole being is loved and accepted in this space, but I might not be there yet. I might not know that space yet. And even when I get there, I might still create some new, but this is what is expected from me, things that, even if I am more expressive, I might fear some behaviors that might put that in danger as well.
So how do we transition from like a being focused on literal survival to I can worry about more like expression related or being my essential self related things. Um, yeah, I see that there's a challenge in kind of convincing my being that I'm not in that survival mode, but for me it's helpful even to just see it. Like there's belonging at a root level and there's belonging at a solar plexus level and there's it's like these steps up, these evolutions in belonging, and to at least put the question to myself, to at least have the presence to go, is my survival really in danger? And of course, there's like a conversation that you have to have with your nervous system, because as soon as the fear comes up, it's just immediately to the reptilian part of my brain, right? Like danger, 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 danger. And so there has to be some space to unpack it, right? Or, like kind of go in slow motion um to before reacting. You were talking about responding versus reacting, but just even being aware that there are different ways of belonging is very helpful to me. And if I'm trading in belonging at an expression level for belonging at it's interesting because lately I've been feeling more bold, feeling more brave to speak up in situations where I know there's a difference of opinion and I care about the other person and I still want them to love and accept me, but saying, yeah, but what do you think about that? And I feel my heart fluttering and I feel like this is a very charged situation. And it's been scary as shit and also really satisfying to play in that space of, can we talk about things where we each have a lot of assumptions and there's, going to be disagreement and there's a lot of charge, like about particular, because we all have the topics that give us that charge. And there are some things it's like, oh, I don't really care about that. But this, if you talk about this, there's a lot of charge. And so I have been experimenting with, what does it feel like to have courage to speak about things that feel important to me in a dynamic, in a relationship where I really care about still being accepted?
That's a sign. That's a sign that you are validating yourself
Mm.
internally more. Like, you know yourself well enough to have that inner validation that doesn't require the external validation because you have it inside. We talked about this in, I think, in the beginning of the podcast, like when we know in our heart something, We don't feel like we have to prove to the other person like, this is my experience, this is my point of view, this is what I believe, and I don't need you to believe so that this is validated, right? I feel like that's what you're bringing. It's another point of belonging, because in points where we feel like I belong to myself in this, like I'm giving myself the validation, and I don't need the other person to validate me so that I feel like I belong. I don't feel ashamed for my point of view. I don't feel ashamed or guilty for having a difference. Then there's no judgment, there's no fear of losing love in that expression. And I feel like this is something that, of course, we need to build in relationships, but we need to, it's that thing that we were talking about, like my part in the pattern, right? If I, maybe, for example, when I was met with the same answer, even if I was acting different, was because my energy was still judgmental, even though I was changing my message. But if I change the energy and come from a loving place where I don't need the other person to act a certain way so that I can love that person, then the dynamic changes. Then
Mm,
there's no need for validation, for the belonging to happen.
yeah. Or if they still, they can't feel it, because we can be so in our own energy we don't feel it. But like if they're still running those old lines, then you would almost be in a place of just kind of joyful laughter. Like when it
Yeah.
happens, you'd be like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. You just what? Wait.
What's happening here? What have you heard?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
And there's in this what I was talking about, like was speaking about things that I are challenging. There is a desire there for me to belong, but it's almost like it's swapped. So instead of I just want to say the thing that I know you agree with so that I'll feel like I belong. Oh my gosh, I've done that so many times. Instead of that, it's like I I want to still belong and have this closeness with you, and for you to know this is a thing that I think. So
Yeah.
it's like bringing more, revealing more of me and saying, and also this is also part of me, and you love me and you care about me. And so this is it. Like, hey, guess what? I also have these warts. For me, they're not warts, but it's like, you know, for you,
It
because I
might be.
know this is not what you think is true, right? It's like you're gonna love me warts and all.
And that creates more closeness if we are willing to accept difference and to uh, yeah, engage in different conversations than just what it's expected,
Yeah.
right?
I also think it expands our ability to accept different thoughts that feel very frightening and scary, because there's the feeling of like, oh, those people over there think that, and what's wrong with them? And then you get somebody who's close to you and go, well, actually, I think that's true. And then it creates a cognitive dissonance, and we can stay in denial about it. We can just, keep the schism. But the hope is that then we go, okay, maybe not everybody who thinks that because they're just some terrible non-human,
Yeah.
right? But like, what is the perspective there? What is the point of view? And can we find something that it like expands the conversation beyond a binary, you're either with me or you're against me?
And we can change from and I don't want even say from hate, but even if you accept that other people see differently, we can change from tolerance, which is like, I, it's okay that they exist, but not close to me, basically something like that, To actually trying to get to understanding.
Mm.
And understanding doesn't mean that we're going to accept. And like now I'm gonna see the world the same way as you do, but I can understand that this is not me against you, but just a difference in perspective.
Yeah. I would take tolerance as a first step because I don't think that's widespread, right? I think mostly we spend our time in the space of how could anybody ever think that, want that, we just make up a story. Make up a story about they're some kind of monster.
Yeah.
And it it challenges. I mean, this is something else about belonging, right? That going back to tribalism and survival, um, one of the ways we know we belong is by making other people not belong, right? And like
That's true.
I can increase my feeling of belonging by putting other people out. And I would say a really typical example of this is teenagers, kids in middle school. And it's like, you attack before somebody can attack you. So, oh, I'm self-conscious about whatever it is. So, oh my gosh, everybody look at that kid over there who, has a dumb lunchbox or what, it's like, he's like, his hair is the wrong color. We put the focus on somebody else and say, look at how much of an outsider they are. And then that makes us feel we're more in the center of the
Yeah.
circle. So it's like we're constantly fighting to get to the hub. And that means we're pushing other people out. And that kind of belonging is also a really unsatisfying belonging, right? Because I can't belong as myself. I can only belong as somebody who upholds the standards and or the trends of the group. And as soon as I go like, well, I actually, I like that thing that you like, it's like, oh, Pokemon is not cool. Okay, so we go, we'll pretend, but I actually really like Pokemon.
Actually, that's exactly why I always struggled with belonging to groups,
Yeah.
because I feel I actually fit in this group except for the spiritual view, or I fit that group except for the political view. I fit that other. And Jordan Peterson talks a lot about that as well, on how people who are more open tend to have more liberated views.
And more overlap then in the groups in the
Yeah,
belonging. Yeah.
but then it doesn't fit with any of the visions that are a little bit more um, dogmatic in any way.
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
And then you won't belong, because all groups have certain rules and certain dogmas and so on, that you might have a tendency of not fitting into this dogma or that dogma. So
Yeah. And we often define ourselves within a group, and we define groups by what we're not. Like yeah, we all rally around this one point, not like those other guys who do this thing that's obviously terrible. And you're like, oh, I don't think those other guys are so terrible. So this feeling of, I mean, and this again, I think this is my big insight from today, that it really pays to think through what kind of belonging we're having. And if it's the kind of belonging where it's conditional belonging, that's what it is. If it's conditional belonging, like as long as you do these things, espouse these views, hate these people, dress this way, do this way, repeat these things, you'll be accepted, versus you belong and are accepted and loved for being you, for being an expression of God in human form. And I mean, I guess that would make it hard to make groups, which is, because
Because
there's just one group. It's like, all of
just
existence.
oneness, just universal love.
And then I think what
Mm.
you brought back from conversations we've had previously is so important in this, because why would it feel like an existential threat to me for other people to have different beliefs, thoughts, patterns, behaviors, unless I doubted my own? Why is it ever a threat to me? I mean, it's wild. You can, like, I would think a kind of low stakes way you see this that's really contentious is what kind of food people eat.
Mm.
It's like, I'm a veganism, I'm paleo, okay, right? And they get really angry and really aggressive about it. It's like, no, there's this one way to eat, and if you're not doing that, then it's like, what kind of terrible human being are you? Right?
Eh,
And
it-
why would you need to have that kind of animosity unless deep down you doubted that you had the right dogma?
I feel like people get really upset with other people's behaviors, like even like it it, well, there might be a little bit of that feeling of being judged or being shamed by
Yeah.
that. For example, if you have a vegan on the table and then you're eating meat, you might feel like that person is judging me because I'm eating meat, or the opposite as well. Like the vegan often is very defensive of
Yeah.
their views, because they're judging me because I'm not eating their food and so on. So there's always that sense of feeling judged and having to protect uh, your view, and often people protect themselves by attack.
Yeah. The best offense or the best defense is a good offense.
Yeah.
But I think that the obviously somebody judging us is going to have an emotional impact. So I don't want to say, oh, we should just be immune, right? We want to connect with other people. And so if we experience judgment, if we experience um, rejection, that's very real. And yet again, the response to it and the need to defend, doesn't that also, you know, give us an insight that we um may not have enough belief in it ourselves. So there's two different things here, right? Because there's the pain of being judged and the pain of being rejected, and that's very real. So if you experience that, of course you're sensitive to it. Um but maybe it's also an invitation to us to go, am I holding these beliefs about what I do in a really internal place in my heart? Or is maybe my reaction to this judgment like an opportunity to look at it and go, oh, I might be not really secure in my belief in my faith. Like, but both things could be happening at the same time. So I was like, okay, maybe that's my, like, oh, why did I get so mad about that? I had this experience around storytelling last year, talking with some friends, and I just all of a sudden like reacted and ranted, not at them, but like kind of what we were talking about. I was like, that's so wrong when people do that. And I was like, just this huge emotion. And they held space for me. And I like, went for a little while. And then my one friend was like, are you sure this is only about storytelling? Like, you really seem to be reactive. And, when I examined it, it was like, oh, yeah, deep down, I have the fear that I do that kind of manipulation, right? It's like, oh, I don't ever want to feel like I'm using storytelling for manipulation. And so
Mm.
that fear, or excuse me, that anger in part is um like a worry. It's a projection, it's like those people do that and it's so terrible. Well, like deep down there's and it's something I'm very attuned to, and so I know I'm extra sensitive to it, right? And so I'm like, oh, for me it's really important not to behave in that way. So yeah, there's me, like my big anger at somebody else is a projection for fear I might act in that way.
That makes so much sense. And yeah, that might even be why we tend to feel like other people need to engage in the same view or in the same behaviors, so that that feels validated, that feels like that's the we're doing the right thing. We don't have to feel guilty or anything from that. Because the other thing that happens sometimes with this sense of self-sabotaging for to not belong, for fear of not belonging, is like when, for example, you outgrow either financially or spiritually your family or the group that you're in, or you change, um, let's say you're in one religion and your family is in another, and or you believe something and your family believes another thing, or you are going on, let's say you're working on a company and all your friends are from that company, and then you decide to go on an entrepreneurship journey, and then you're losing all your friends because they're in a different dynamic and you're going into a different path. All these changes that change our identity with that can bring a lot of guilt and shame that I'm not part of the group anymore.
Hmm. That's so interesting because we were talking about belonging as a matter of survival, but it's also a matter of shame. Like, why? Why do we feel shame when we do something? Is it simply because shame is a tool? Like, shame is so uncomfortable that it's been an effective tool to get people to shape up so that they can survive. I mean, it could just be that, right? But
Yeah, to continue being part of a
yeah,
group.
yeah, like we need something that shows you a pain that's not death or dismemberment, but
Yeah.
that you take seriously, right?
Mm.
Like, hey, you're on a dangerous road. Can't you feel it? And you're like, yes, this feels awful.
Yeah. You're getting out of what's expected
Yeah.
from you to be part of this.
Yeah. Ooh. So we want to be continually asking, what group am I part of? And is it the current right fit? Is it helping me live not just from a survival point of view, but live in an expressed way? Is it helping me be the person I feel I am right now at this stage of my life? Which is so hard. It takes a lot of courage to do. What's your big insight from our conversation?
My memory is really bad. I mentioned the big insight a few minutes ago, and I can't remember which one it was now.
I love
Uh,
it. That's when you know you have a lot of good stuff in a conversation. It's like, which insight was it?
yeah, I was trying to remember which one was that one, because we came into so many. And yeah, what's yours? I need to start taking notes.
Yeah, my big insight is still that we are trying to belong from different chakras. And so to just be cognizant of like, this feels like the fear of, lack of survival, not belonging, but it is more likely to be the fear of not belonging, like from here or from here.
Yeah.
Um,
I
just like my insight is to question, is this really an existential threat?
yeah. I don't know if it was my biggest insight, but I think the one that I was mentioning in that moment was about that idea that you brought of the play
Yeah.
and how it repeat behavior in that automatic way. Uh,
And you talked about if you could shift your energy, not
yeah,
just
and
the lines you're saying, but your energy. Yeah.
yeah. So I don't know if it's the biggest insight because I feel like there were many, but just being aware of those moments and where my energy is
Yeah.
in those moments, I feel like can be a big shift.
That
For
sounds to
them.
me like my insight homework. Like that's where I want to be incited to action. So if I'm paying attention to um like my response and feeling like this is an existential threat, if I can build the awareness and realize it's not, then it'll be easier to shift the energy, not just the lines I'm saying.
Yeah.
Huh.
Mm.
That feels good.
Yeah,
Feels feels more open, more expansive, more possibility.
for sure.
Beautiful. Well, we'd love to hear your insights, and what you feel incited to take as your action step in this conversation around belonging and the assumptions we make around belonging.
Yeah. And until next time, keep being insightful of your dynamics in relationships.
There you go. Thanks for tuning in. Catch you next time.
To you.